folks, I think we're ready to get started. For all of you on for this session, thank you so much for joining us. And if you miss anything, don't worry. This is going to be recorded and posted to our website later. We'll also be able to bring out this great resource to other coaches as well by posting it on our website. I'm Andrew Dahlberg. I'm the president of Champion Briefs. We're really happy to host you for the rest of today. This session will be about coaching for speech events. We have a session about coaching debate events after that, and then one about team logistics to close out the day, how to get prepared for tournaments and work with your team on that kind of stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the wonderful Rachel West for our session on coaching speech events. Take it away, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Happy Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. Once the winter break hits, I just stop counting days. But I am of Cypress Bay High School. I'm the director of forensics there. And our speech team is pretty sizable. So let me share my screen with you and we can get going. There we go. This, I think when it's full screen, it eliminates, oh no, it doesn't. All right, great. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat and I'll be checking periodically or just raise your hand. Awesome. So we'll start with Oratory Info. Then we'll go to Interp, limited prep, and then I'll just give you some general kind of tips and ideas for coaching your speech students. All right, first with Oratory and Info, there's three key things that you want to think about when you're coaching your Oratory and Info students: organization, creative writing, and editing. Those, to me, in my opinion, are the pillars of getting a good Oratory and Info squad. So the first thing is organization. You want to establish a time frame for your students. So if they are competing in a tournament that is 1 month away, 2 months away, etc., have them sit down and plan out already the different chunks that they need to take care of. And we'll talk about chunks when we get down to organization and argumentation. But if they are performing a month from now, their speech should be written at least a week before that tournament so they can memorize it, if they can memorize in a week. So time frame is super, super important. I see a lot of students get caught up in, just signing up for a tournament and they're like, yeah, I can write it and memorize it in 2 weeks. And unfortunately, a good topic can go to waste with just like poor time organization. The second one is Classlike Resources. This event is the closest to anything that your students who haven't done speech before to a normal class assignment like an essay. So it's important to connect that bridge for them, to show them that it's not impossible to write a speech and it's not impossible to memorize it and deliver it. And by putting that Oratory and information into a worksheet that they can understand. And let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So I always, for every single one of my students, I use a worksheet that looks like this. It's our oratory topic selection. I also have one for info topic selection, and it just takes them through some general questions when they tell you that they're going to do a topic. Never has a student come up to me and gone, I want to do a topic on this. And I go, yeah, start writing. I go, oh, that sounds good. Even if in my mind, I'm like, that's not going to work out. The fact that they have come up with it by themselves, that means they have some kind of connection to it. They like it. I don't want to automatically shut down ideas. I tell them to do this worksheet. And usually, pretty good turnout. They come to the conclusion themselves that it's either not a solid topic or they need to keep workshopping it until it's a solid topic. So taking you quickly through it, explain your topic. Why is it important to your audience? What's the significance? Why does this problem exist? That gets you talking about causes already in your topic selection. Yes, that's a great question. Sharing the templates. I spoke to Andrew and I can send him the files and he'll upload it to a, what is it, Dropbox, and we can send the link out. So you can have access to these resources for sure. What are two misconceptions regarding your topic? Personal connection. That one's huge. All of your students should have a personal connection to their topic. How can this topic appeal to your audience's emotions? Provide a comparison or a metaphor that your audience will understand, resources, and already thinking about solutions. So this is all the things that your students should be thinking about before they even start writing. A lot of the times they'll pick a topic, they'll go, I want to talk about cancel culture in an oratory. And you'll go, okay. And then they'll start writing and they'll hit roadblocks along the way. And those roadblocks are what slows them down. It discourages them from the writing process. And if they're discouraged from the writing process, they're not going to get to the memorization and they're not going to get to that tournament, that thing that's going to like wake up the fire in them to want to keep doing this activity. So hopefully in doing this hard work in the beginning and thinking about these questions in the beginning, we navigate through all of that. Once they've done this and they get the approval from you, they move on to outlining. And there's a worksheet for that, where they have to create their thesis, right? Another bridge. They always have to do a thesis in their essays. Great. That's the exact same way you do a thesis in a speech. And you have them outline their ideas. I don't know if this is the same for your students at your school, but for my students, when I tell them to outline something, it's like they've never heard of an outline before. So fair warning, they may fight on outlining their speech, but it has never failed them. It makes the writing process that much faster when they know exactly where they're going. And again, you'll have access to this resource here. Okay. But yes, Classlike Resources, just like that one, worksheets have been, I introduced them 2 years into my coaching, and it completely changed the success rate of my students. I was noticing that novice students were becoming much more successful faster, and not even just in awards and trophies, but like in ownership of knowing how to do the event. It just got much faster for them. And then finally, organization and argumentation. That's going to come from the worksheets as well, is because they're thinking about that argumentation much earlier than they would have before. Next is creative writing. This is really hard because usually students don't dabble in creative writing until later in their high school career, and it's probably an elective or a slip somewhere in an AP course. But the way that you get your students to be funny or to seem conversational is because they need that connection. That's why it's so important for them to know their topic, to love their topic, to have some kind of connection to it. And then the second point is, Miss West, I want to talk about the time that I failed a test as my AGD. They'll be like, oh, I failed a test one time. And they're like, I don't know what else to write for my AGD. And so teaching them how to take a story about failing a test and turning it into this like grandiose AGD that we see on a national final stage is all about showing them how a story can be over exaggerated and blown up. And the way that I do that is not just showing them NSDA videos, is also, this is extra work, sorry, but I type out that person's intro. So while they're speaking, I'll transcribe it. There's also online resources where you can speech to text something so you don't have to do it yourself. Unfortunately, I discovered that technology after doing it myself. But have the student speaking it and then show their intro next to it. Because sometimes students get caught up in the fantasy of like seeing them speak and they're like, oh, I'll never be like that. But if you show them the written out intro next to it, it looks much more normal and much more achievable. And they can see how they turned, for example, Avi's talking about his speech from like 3 years ago. His AGD was on taking Latin in high school. Like it sounds pretty normal, pretty boring, but how he blew it up was really important. He talked about going to a picnic and not really knowing what to do because, the French club had beautiful French food and the people who took Spanish had beautiful Spanish food. And he was like, we had to go to a graveyard because Latin's a dead language, right? And it was cute the way he like blew it up that way. And when they saw it on the paper, they're like, oh, okay. So having the writing sample next to the video is really important for fostering that creative writing. And then finally, editing. So you've gotten to the point where your students have written their speech, everything looks good. What do you do now? You perform, you get the feedback, and you edit. The speech that the student creates in September should never be the same speech that they have in April. It should look different because that shows that you have engaged with the feedback from your judges. And speeches that grow throughout the year do better, perform better, and make the student feel better than speeches that just stay. All right. I'll delete those so I don't get confused. Great. Next is Interp. And so Interp can also be broken down into these three ideas: event selection, piece selection, and crafting. So Interp, unlike Oratory and Info, where they're kind of sister events, one is informing, one is persuading, Interp has a lot of different, like very different types of pieces under its umbrella. So when a student approaches you and wants to do an interpretive event, that's a bit of a longer conversation than whether that student wants to inform or persuade. And the way that you guide them towards which event to select, I think comes down to two different ways that you can do. You can think about skills focused. So how did this student come about finding interpretation? Did they come from theater? If they came from theater, they might be more focused in the dramatic interpretation, at least to start, because that's a monologue. They're used to that. They're used to auditioning with monologues. They're used to embodying a character in that way and then delivering that performance, right? It's a very good connection for them. Or perhaps this student has a lot of great physicality. And maybe you don't know they have physicality yet. The way that you test that is the second way. Have three just base pieces, like samples, a POI sample, an HI sample, a DI sample, and have them read or walk through it. Ask them questions like, what would this character sound like? Can you make different voices? Do you find yourself doing silly voices in your head or with your friends? Those students might be more geared towards an HI or a POI because they have the skill set for that. They have the natural skills for that already. Sometimes teaching a student how to manipulate their voice is very time consuming because we don't usually do that every day. So go high, go low, sound like a monster can be a big push and pull when that student could have started in DI and gotten the performance skills from that first and then moved that direction. The second is piece selection. So the first bullet is that it's a whole new world because before we could only pick pieces with ISBN numbers, which meant that you could only pick published plays, published books, things from magazines, which was very limiting. If you can imagine, even though there's tons of books and tons of plays, it's extremely limiting. But now the word published has been stretched out a bit for the NSDA. And so now we can pick things from online resources. We can pick movies that are published, right? And so that makes a much more enjoyable experience on the coach end for piece like searching and selection, but also an easier avenue for students to find things that they connect with and they relate to. For me, I find the best pieces in these three areas. Funny enough, bad movies. Bad Netflix movies make amazing Interp pieces because they can usually be summed up in 10 minutes. It's so weird, but just go to a Netflix original, pick a bad movie. That's probably a good DI or a good duo. Number two, one act plays. You kill two birds with one stone. You know it's published because it has an ISBN, but also it's not really long. Sometimes cutting down so much material can be overwhelming for a student. Many students like to gravitate towards books, but again, cutting down a novel is really difficult for a novice interpreter. So one act plays is great. They usually last 30 to 40 minutes. It's easier to take that down to 10. And then finally, podcasts. Podcast is something that wasn't afforded to us before, but now it is open to us. Podcasts are some of my favorite pieces, avenues to pull from for pieces. I had a novice student who came from theater, and she found a piece that she really connected with from this podcast I'll show you. And she qualified to nationals with the piece. And it's not that the piece matters so much more than the student. It's just that we were able to find something so good for a beginner performer on this podcast. It's called The Moth. They specialize in first person storytelling, which is another reason why podcasts are so cool, is because working through plays and books or short stories, you have to filter through all of the third person or the second person, trying to find the first person literature for your student to perform. Podcasts are all first person because they're telling a story. So this is one of my favorite podcasts to go to. And even in the podcast itself, it gives you really cool tips on how to tell a story. So the performers themselves are even amazing interpreters. So watching them could be knowledge building for your student as well. So that's The Moth. And then finally, crafting. Again, I would really like, if you don't have an NSDA account, please make one. If you don't have the resource package, and if you're in Broward, talk to Justin, because that package is it's pivotal to all the resources that your students can have access to. So very similar to Oratory Info, where I show the video with the writing sample. It's really great to do that with Interp as well. And the exciting part is that, not here, they have that. So when you go to all resources, and let's say you want to look at dramatic interpretation, you can go to the high school 2021 script list. And you can download all of the scripts that were used during that Nationals of 2021. Download the script, read it, have your students read it, and watch the performance together. That's going to blow their mind, your mind, watching how the script comes alive. Because there's only so much you can do in a classroom with a student, with blocking, with altering the voice. But when they see it come from a script to a nationals performance, like right in front of them, they learn a lot just in that. Checking for questions. I'm from Chicago, so I talk very fast. My apologies if I'm going 50 miles a minute. I promise I left time at the end for questions. Extemp. So Extemp, out of all of your events, your Extemp students should be meeting more than once a week. And that, in my very humble opinion, these students should meet at least twice a week, with one of those practices being focused on skills and the other practice being focused on knowledge building. And that's because they don't have a script to revise every week or after every tournament that they perform in. They don't have blocking to go over and to recraft. They have their brain and the limited preparation that they do 30 minutes after they receive their questions. So they really need to come back to these skills and come back to these lessons every week in order to continue sharpening their tools. So the first one is skills. I like to use drills with my Extemp students. The first one is speaking drills. And the magic of Extemp is that the judge knows that the student received that question only 30 minutes ago, and the student is speaking as if it's a prepared speech. Part of that magic is being able to speak fluently without doing that, having mental fuzz, having a lot of vocal fillers, things like that. Things that I am very, very bad at, but are working on. The first one is called expert. That drill is the student stands in front of the room and you give them any topic. It could be socks, it could be underwater basket weaving, and they have 4 minutes or however time you can give them, as long time, however challenging you want it to be, to speak on that topic as if they are the expert in that topic. Usually, the harder it is, the funnier it is, or the more fun it is for the students to watch each other, egg each other on. So you can combine two things like sock flavored ice cream, and they have to be the expert on sock flavored ice cream for the next 4 minutes and really convince us to buy it. Number 2 is Snap. Snap is a bit more difficult. So for your students who are acing the fun expert speaking drill, Snap is they have to circle through topics. So you want to keep those more basic than the expert topics. Snap is I stand up and for 7 minutes, which is the length of your extemp speech, you have to talk about the changing topics as I snap. So start off with bottled water. Bottled water was invented in 19, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that's true. And it was crafted by a man named, make up the name, blah, 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 snap. Now you're talking about computers. And now you're talking about computers. So what that speaking drill does is getting them to switch the wires in their brain over to new topics constantly while they're speaking, because that's what they're going to be doing when they have their question in front of them. The second one is a memorization drill. That's the other part of the magic of extemp, is that they've had to memorize those sources that they just researched for 30 minutes. So their source tag, them and a partner are teamed up, and they have to memorize each 5 sources on the board. It can be NPR from January 1st, 2021. CNN, August 25th, 2021, right? And they have to memorize the source and the date. They memorize it, they go out in the hallway, and then their partner comes in and memorizes that list and another list. If they get it wrong, if the first person gets one of the sources wrong, they have to completely start over. And so it creates an accountability for each other to memorize faster or to memorize better, because they're like, I don't want to start over, because that ends up being 10 sources that I have to memorize instead of 5. Moving on to knowledge building. Topic lectures are really important. So instead of the students standing up and giving a typical speech or prepping a question or even doing those drills, this practice is dedicated to just building their knowledge. So either you or a student who has prepped this lesson beforehand gives a lecture on any given topic. So perhaps the tournament this weekend has topics like Africa, Central Asia, domestic, internet, education, things like that. They'll do a lecture on domestic education issues. And so you're sitting there and they're intaking the information. They're not prepping, they're just learning, because at the end of the day, the best extempers are the extempers that just know what's happening in the world. And the way that you do that is through knowledge building. So using those tournament topics are great starting points. For example, I just went to a previous tournament that we went to, the Debate Broward AST, and the 2 extemp topic areas were COVID-19 and the student debt crisis. So that Thursday before the AST, our second extemp practice was a lecture on COVID, what new updates have happened with COVID, the new numbers of what's going on in the situation, where the vaccine is across the world. And then the second half of the lecture was on the student debt crisis. Where are we? How close are we into passing any kind of legislation? Has the legislation for public servants like teachers and loan forgiveness changed at all? So things like that, having open conversations with students to just build that knowledge. And then finally, again, practice. I preach that students should be giving an actual speech 1 to 2 times per week. And 1 to 2 means that the first speech that they give is during that first practice. So they do a drill and give a speech. And the second one that they give can be at home. Or sometimes I have students do it during their study hall. But anytime else during the week, give a second speech, record it, and send it to your captain or send it to me, the head coach. Then finally, if they don't have time to give a full speech, or if you notice that students are particularly struggling with an intro or getting an organization down in their argumentative points. Practice their speeches in chunks. So, hey, Bobby, I don't want you to give your full speech. I want you to just prep your intro and give that. That's all we're going to work on. And so it feels less overwhelming, and you're also not burning the student out by practicing skills that they don't necessarily need to practice at that time. And finally, just some general tips about running a speech squad. The first one is recruiting. Students usually flock to 3 things: the crowd, which is the size of the event. If I notice that my PF squad and my Oratory and Info squad are huge, and guess what? Guess where all the new students want to go to? They want to go to PF, and they want to go to Oratory and Info, because at the end of the day, speech and debate is also a friendship building event. And so having more people there is more opportunity for them to make friends, more opportunity for them to socialize and have a community after school. So students usually follow where the large crowds are. So if you can manage sizable, even numbers across, that'd be helpful. Obviously, I'm not doing that. I think it's fine after a pandemic to just let the numbers do what they do. It follows the fame. So if you have a very notable policy team that wins a lot, you'll probably recruit a lot of students to that because they are attracted to, they're like, oh, they're winning a lot. I want to win. I want to be on the winning team, right? And then finally, safety. If your team is an inclusive space of all genders, of all sexual identities, of all races, and not just inclusive, but you're also providing equal opportunity, you're sharing equal success, you're uplifting the students equally, and you're protecting them and supporting them, they're going to flock to that. You'll find students coming to your room. They're like, I don't know what speech and debate is, but this seems like a place that I can be safe and secure. I want to be here. I even just hanging a pride flag. I had a pride flag in my room, and I have so many students who are like, I feel like I can breathe in this classroom. I want to know what speech and debate is about, right? That is a foot in the door right there. Being good, quote unquote, you're like, how do I get my kids to be good? Or the students are like, how do I get good? The students at the highest level of this activity all have one thing in common. When you talk to them, they loved their speeches. They lived and breathed what they were talking about. And that's why I always stress that student connection portion of speech topics. They need to be connected to it, whatever they're talking about. And it can't just be that they're kind of interested in it. Some part of their life should be in it, some part of their story. And that is hard. That is vulnerable for a young student to be a part of, but it's also very rewarding when they are able to create something constructive out of a part of their identity. Running practice. I know I gave all this information, and through giving you this information, I feel like I gave you more work to do. But what I have found is helpful is that train your captains. Focus a lot of your energy on a couple students that you know can be great teachers, and then turn those students around and have them help you coach not on your behalf, but they can be your second set of eyes. It's always helpful to have a nice second set of eyes when you're like, I'm tired. Can you go through this speech for me to see if there's any glaring errors? I need to really grade these papers. I need to really get this done. When you have students that you can trust like that, students who are knowledgeable like you are, and let them surpass you. If they learn more, if they're going faster, great, awesome. That creates a well-oiled machine so that all of the work is not just on you, because this can burn you out quickly trying to create, a lot of these opportunities for your students. Interdisciplinary, your speech events and your speech kids should commingle. So it's great when an Oratory and Info student wants to dabble in extemp or wants to come to an extemp practice and do speaking drills. What happens when an Info kid forgets their speech in the middle of the round? It would be really awesome to fall back on a speaking drill that taught them to not give up and to talk through it instead of stopping and having a brain freeze, right? Those lessons are interchangeable, they're invaluable. An ex-STEM kid should learn from an Interp on how to be full of expression when they speak, and how to put your biggest self forward, because that's going to look different, talking about foreign policy from such a charismatic character. It's going to look and feel different for your judge. When you have new program, do not have captains. When you have a new program, this may not be the best answer, but a lot of it is going to fall on you. And then I would say choose an event to give a lot of love to. For me, my first year, that was Oratory Info. I gave a lot of love to that. And I gave a lot of love to finding students who could be pillars for that. And now that part of my team almost runs itself. And then I can focus on building Interp and Extemp to where it is there. So don't stretch yourself too thin trying to do all of it. Obviously, you don't want to deter students. If they're like, I want to do Extemp, they'll be like, no, we don't have time. But what you do want to do is try to create some kind of event brand for your team first, just to help yourself out. Speaking of, that's a great segue. Speech isn't easy. Maybe you are a debate heavy squad and you're like, I'm trying to recruit debaters, but they keep saying that speech is easy. Speech is not easy. I have pulled PFers over, I've pulled policy people over to watch speech rounds, to watch me coach a speech kid. I just have them sit in on coaching sessions and they're like, oh, this is tough. It's tough stuff. So it's not easy. And if you hear that kind of language and kind of message around your team, try your best to shut that down and create a new culture for your team, especially if that's what you're trying to do, is create a speech team. Speech isn't easy. And sometimes we get that from middle school and elementary school, because they're like, speech is fun. Speech is just like, anyone can do it. But just because anyone can do it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean everyone can be like great at it, And then finally, ask questions. Do not be afraid to ask this silly question. Don't be afraid to ask, is this legal? Like, can I use this piece? Don't sacrifice like being like, I need to feel like I know everything as the coach, in order, because that's going to let you down in the end, and it's going to let your students down in the end. So ask questions, rely on people. I put my email as the first part of the slide. That's my Broward School's email if you ever wanted to contact me. But that's probably my biggest set of advice, is ask questions when you feel stuck. But I have 10 minutes. Woo! Left 10 minutes for questions, if you have any. How long do my practices last? So that's a great question. They usually last between an hour and an hour 15 if the students are focused right on time. So they start at 3 p.m. and they usually go to 4 to 4:15. How often do competitions allow students to observe students? Oh, pandemic aside, I was going to say pandemic, but pandemic aside, always. If there's a tournament in person, any student can go into any room and watch, except for Extemp. Extemp, you can only watch out-round events. Unless it's judge's choice. If I was judging an Extemp round and I had a student come in and say they just wanted to watch the prelim, I would say yes. But there are some judges who'd say no. Safest bet for Extemp, go watch a quarterfinal or above. What advice do you have for the online age? Should students change their performances much? Yes. That's a hard way to get around it. But it really depends. The things that I'm thinking of, Extemp won't have to change. For your interpers, kind of spent this year trying to, I think, build a new wheel. And I've seen a lot of HIers, get in the camera and do really cool things where they like disappear and they'll come back. All of that has to change once in person. And that is going to be exciting for them, but it's also going to be extremely frustrating for them. And that is like the truthful answer. For oratory and info, you're going to have to teach your kids how to project again. I'm especially watching my students come from competing online in middle school to now competing in person for like local level novice events. They're getting a lot of ballots on volume because they're not used to projecting past a mic. So practice projection with your students, practice walking patterns, taking big steps across the classroom instead of little ones to the side to stay in the camera frame. Those little things are sometimes going to slip your mind or slip your students' mind until they're in front of a room again and they go, whoa, oh, I forgot how this felt. And then the third biggest thing for switching from online to in person is timing. There's going to be faces. There's going to be people who laugh and smile at your jokes, and learning comedic timing is going to be a whole new ball game for students who have just spoken to a camera lens here where you guys can't really laugh. You just type haha, but that's all you can do. So those are my biggest tips of advice, or things to look out for, issues for switching to the in-person away from the digital age. Why do some groups say no to observers? I think stimpers and impromptuers, so limited prep events, will say no to observers because those students typically are only used to competing in front of their judge. So sometimes it's just a comfort issue. For your extempers, all they know is prepping for 30 minutes, coming in and giving it to their judge. So if they see another student in there, it could throw them off. So it's not really like a malicious thing. It's more of like a students are only used to having one person in the room thing. Advice for peer coaching. How can we explain to students how to be good coaches to each other? That is a great question. For students, when they're peer coaching each other, draw on, I don't know how many of you have an English background, but if you want to think from your peer editing skills, is how do I give feedback that is helpful and can be fixed? So if a student is watching another student, coach them into being like, are you giving a criticism that the student can fix? If your criticism is your voice sounds weird, how can a student fix that? That's not something that's fixable. Or I couldn't hear you. Oh, I can go louder. So switching, and this is even good for your parents and how people write ballots. So like this conversation can extend beyond peer coaching into ballot writing as well. But how do you turn the criticism that you want to give to someone else into something constructive? And it usually comes with, what does that person need to do to satisfy the issue that you have? If you don't give them something actionable, then it's not really constructive. It's just criticism. How do you decide if a topic is better for oratory or informative? I think my two discuss are having some internet info. Do what they say. Oh, how do you decide if it's better for oratory or informative? Can it be solved? If a issue can be solved with tangible social solutions, then it's probably for an oratory. If it cannot be solved, or if it's something that's not really an issue, then you want to go towards informative. An example of this is probably, I'm trying to think of one that kind of like crosses hairs. One of my students did racism as a public health issue, which technically I guess could have been an oratory because it sounds like a problem, racism. But there is not really a tangible solution that you can give in 10 minutes to solving racism. So she found this cool article that talked about what happens if we started viewing racism as like a health crisis. And so she did an info on that solution. And so sometimes it's easier to go, yeah, we can talk about solutions for this, but is it even possible? Usually if a solution is possible, you can do an oratory on it. If it doesn't seem possible, it should probably stay in info. What are some WK? Fours up. Hey, WKU, shout out, Hilltopper gang. What are some structured activities that students can do together to work on their skills, projection, voice volume during a meeting? And there is okay. So projection of voice. If you are allowed to be in your hallways after school, the student, you stand at a 6-foot distance from your student as they begin speaking, and then just slowly step backwards. That's the best activity that I have. That's probably the most effective one that I have as well, is that like they are shocked by how far their voice is like not going. They think it's going much farther than it actually is. So you'll take 2 steps back and you're like, I can't hear you. And they're like, what? Or steps work as well. If you start at the bottom of the steps and then they work their way up and continue to speak as they get further away up the steps away from you, that's a great way to practice projection of the voice. If you notice that your students are shouting instead of projecting, have all of them lay down on the ground and put a book on their stomach while they're speaking. If that book isn't rising or falling, that means they're only projecting from their chest, which is just yelling. But if they see they're breathing, pushing the book up and down, it means that they're using their bellies, they're using their diaphragms, and that means they're truly projecting their voice. And so they don't harm themselves either. By like, you know, they don't need 50 cough drops by the end of a one-day tournament. Any other questions? These are great questions. Can we get this slide? Email. Yeah, I'll put my email back on the screen. There we go. Get the slide. I think so. That might be an Andrew question. Either you'll get the video of me doing this again, which will have the slide in it, or I can put my slides into the Dropbox.
Yeah, we can send out the slideshow as well.
Okay. Nice. Nice. Any other questions? Can't stress how important NSDA resource packages. Stressing again, if you have a new program, to start slow. You guys are obviously all overachievers because you're here. And so it's easy to take information and you want to do it all at once. And my biggest advice would be to not do it all at once, is to focus on one area and make that area really good and get used to being comfortable and good in that area, and then cross apply. Biggest set of advice, especially if you're by yourself and you don't have like either a co-coach or a co-director or anything like that. Take it slow. Anything else?
All right. If there's no other questions for Rachel, thank you, Rachel, so much for a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for attending. We'll be back here at 2 p.m. for our session on coaching debate events with Charles Karcher and Nathan Johnston. So take a little bit of a break here, and we'll see you back at 2. Once again, thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.